Deep Geek Live. Today, I have got a fantastic special guest who is, like me, an avid fan and expert on Westworld. Westworld is where we're going to be starting today, and we're going to be moving on to cover wherever the chat wants to go. But I will let her introduce herself. Um, uh, Vanessa, do you want to say hi?
Hello. Hi, Robert. Hi, everyone. So glad to be back. It's been a while, but I always love doing live streams with you. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am a writer for Watchers on the Wall. I also write for Westworld Watchers. I do a podcast for the Night's Cast, and also I have recently started one covering Stephen King novels and adaptations, and that one's called Needful King. So definitely check those out. And like I said, I'm very happy to be back.
Well, a delight to have you. I would like to know, first of all, tell me a bit more about the needful things, is it?
Needful
What
King. Needful
needful
King, yeah.
king? Oh, I get it. Nice. The
Yeah.
needful. So this is it just on podcast right now?
It's on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and SoundCloud. We also have a Patreon, so it's patreon.com/Needful King. And right now we're covering The Outsider, different movies. We'll be covering upcoming adaptations, and we do special patron-only episodes as well.
Fantastic. And for those who do not know, Vanessa is one of my favorite artists. I would actually say in the entire world, which will probably embarrass her. For those who don't know, somewhere up around, hang on, let's see whether I always get the wrong way here. It's there, and you can't really see it, but it's always there behind me. Is one of Vanessa's paintings. She does the most amazing Game of Thrones and Westworld and lots of other fantastic things. And I knew I'd get her embarrassed. Look at her.
Thank you.
She does fantastic stuff. So I would highly recommend that you go and check out her website, which is at
It's vkcoleart.com. And for anyone going to Con of Thrones, which will be in Orlando in July, I should have a table there as well with my artwork, so you can come purchase some merchandise from me.
excellent. And this time I managed pretty much all of Last Con of Thrones to avoid Vanessa, which was a real disappointment to me. So this
Not
time
on purpose.
I'm going to prioritize. I know it wasn't on purpose. It was just our paths never crossed. This time I'm going to
Yes.
prioritize trying to track her down and try and find some of her artwork. But anyway, guys, I just want to move on to the way we're going to structure this, as we always do. I'm going to frame it around some questions I've got from my patrons. We're going to look at, first of all, we're going to look at Westworld. For those who do not know, Westworld season 3 is coming back. The season premiere is going to be March the 15th. And we've got
The Ides of March.
I know, very excited, isn't it?
I wonder if they picked that for a reason.
Well, it's a Sunday. I think it's we've had 2, maybe 3 trailers now. Lots of stuff on Twitter. I think, Vanessa, I'm going to throw to you just to start with on Westworld. What's your feel on what Westworld season 3 is starting to shape up as, based on what we've been given so far?
Right. So it's definitely looking like it'll be focused more outside of the park, in the real world. With looks like Dolores has kind of infiltrated human society. We are really not sure what she's up to, but it looks like she may be teaming up with, we assume, as another human, played by Aaron Paul, who is playing a character named Caleb. Looks like he's involved in some kind of criminal activity as well. So is she going to enlist his help in taking down, some of these corporations like Delos, this new one called Insight that they've been promoting really heavily. So I am very interested to see what they're going to do with it. As far as inside the park, I think the only real shots we've gotten are, I think it's called War World. It's like a World War II simulation where Maeve and Hector are. So they've been put into a new area of the park. But yeah, it's going to be a very different feel, I think, than prior seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree that the way that they framed this, so we've had the first kind of teaser trailer we had was based on the new Aaron Paul character. He's coming into the cast. He's this guy called Caleb. He's in the outside world. He's just kind of like a construction worker, as far as we can understand. And the kind of visuals we got were sort of Blade Runnery on that one. Then we had a kind of a teaser trailer they did for Comic-Con, which had a few short shots, including the Maeve shots that you said about War World, which seems to be Second World War, Western Europe, probably France, Paris, maybe. Maeve, my guess is again a sort of a madam in some kind of a sort of Parisian cafe, and we also got more views of where Dolores is out there in the real world, facing up to what humanity actually is. And then the third thing we got was this kind of it was the teaser announcement of the the date, the premiere date of 15th of March, which gave us this monologue by, and I don't know, maybe Vanessa in a moment you'll be able to speculate on who it might be, but this person who seems to be talking about the history of humanity up to that point, which is basically saying, you know, this is a history of disasters until we took over with all of our programs and with Solomon, which is something that I think is going to come up quite big in this season. And then you came along again, Vanessa, perhaps you could speculate on you, whether that's Dolores or someone else, you came along and kind of mucked it up. So what do you think's going on there? What do you think's going on in the outside world?
So something I've been wondering is if we're going to see some kind of time jump. Um, I'm wondering if it's even going to pick up right where we left off with Dolores kind of new to the outside world, or if this is going to be, you know, several years forward in time. And the reason I wonder that is there really has been no mention of Delos, as far as I can tell, in any of the promotional material, and it's all been about this company called Insight. So I'm just curious, did Delos go out of business? Was there enough bad publicity they couldn't contain about the park uprising? Did they lose enough money that they had to fold? I mean, we don't know what happened to William. Um, presumably he may have been locked up. You know, he did murder his daughter, so we don't know his mental state. So I'm very curious as to the fate of Delos and if maybe this Insight company has taken over. And the other thing that makes me wonder if there's a time jump is we've seen a lot of the hosts in the promo material, but we haven't seen any of the humans that we're used to. So we haven't seen any of the text. I've seen nothing that has confirmed if they're going to even be in the season. So I think there's a lot of things that they can do with having these, you know, robots that don't age. You can really play around with the timeline. So I'm thinking that that may be something they're going to do this season. And I know the other thing is that Jonathan Nolan has said that the focus is really going to be on algorithmic determination and how they use these formulas to predict, you know, what humans like and don't like, and, you know, use that information to kind of plan ahead. And from what it looks like in this latest trailer, it looks like they have been able to do this on a grand scale where they can accurately predict human behavior and use it to control events. So I'm wondering if this is something that Dolores is going to exploit or try and get rid of somehow. So I think there's so many ways that could go with the show, and they've been pretty vague in what they've given us so far. So I think it's kind of hard to make a hard guess as to what we're going to see.
Yeah, and I think so the insight thing, and as you were saying, the kind of the algorithmic determinism. I think this is something they've been playing with through all of the pre-publicity, which and Westworld, for my money, does the best pre-publicity out of any of the TV shows, probably because they have more time to think about it. They at some kind of tech fair, I don't really know which one it was, they hosted an event where they were trying to provide meals for people that they knew they would like. And that was the idea that was going on here, was that they were getting inside your mind and providing what you want. Now that seems to me to be the kind of the feel of what Solomon is. And this is where I think they're going with it, is that Solomon is this concept of trying to manage humanity so humanity doesn't destroy itself. And they have got this working its way through time until suddenly this kind of like fly in the ointment, this kind of spanner in the works, Dolores appears, and she mucks things up somehow. So I think that's where you are. The time jump thing, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about why you think there might be a time jump. I picked up on something that Justin Thomas, a friend of both of ours, who has noticed and I've got my piece of paper here because I scribbled down the exact dates. So the events that we know about in Westworld seasons 1 and 2 seem to have happened in 2052. This, according to this latest teaser trailer, happened in 2058. So is there a 6-year jump here? What's going on there?
So, yeah, I was going to bring that up. So, yeah, we do know that Maeve attempted to escape the park on June 15th, 2052.
Yeah.
And so we do get this new trailer had a date, a divergence of 2/27/58, which was a critical event at an unknown location. Now, is this something that has happened before this season is starting? Is it something that's going to happen during the season? We don't know. But that definitely gives me reason to think that we will see a jump forward in time, because either it's something that has recently happened or it's something that we will see happen during the course of season 3. Otherwise, I don't understand why they would have it in that trailer.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we are going to see events happening 6 years, 5-6 years in the future. Now, whether it's all happening at the same time, they just do a big jump and everything moves on to that point in time, or we're going to see things again happening at different points in time and then slowly figure out what the truth is of where we're at, I don't know. This does bring me on to a question from one of my patrons, Lily Melon, saying there were official suggestions that season 3 would be easier to follow for the audience. How did you feel about season 2 yourselves? Was it deliberately too convoluted or in keeping with the premise? I personally felt there was more focus on the timeline mystery than there was on the narrative itself. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Looking back on season 2, was it too convoluted? And are we therefore in season 3 going to see a less convoluted kind of timeline going on?
Yeah, I think that they probably will have it be a little more straightforward. I personally didn't mind the timeline confusion in season 2. I enjoy kind of puzzling out those mysteries and figuring everything out. So it didn't really bother me, but I can see why it really took some people out of the story, because if you're spending so much time just trying to understand where you are in the story, it doesn't allow you to focus on any themes or character development. So yeah, I think that is something that they aren't going to try and trick us with this time. I mean, you never know, but I just don't, I think that they're going to have different mysteries each season. So like the first season is, who's a host, who's not, are these hosts really becoming sentient? What's Ford's ultimate goal here? Season 2 is just trying to puzzle out what was happening when and who was behind it. And so I think season 3 is going to be focused more on what's Dolores going to do now that she's free? She, definitely does not like humans. And from everything we've learned so far, it seems like she's all about taking them down. But is that going to change when she's out interacting with real people that aren't these super wealthy elites that come to the park and just use it to play out their horrible, violent fantasies? They're going to be a very different set of people I think she's going to meet when she's out of the park. And perhaps that will color her view of humanity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that what we're going to see is when Dolores gets out into the real world, she will encounter real people, and she will discover that the people who could afford to go into Westworld, they're just this tiny elite. And everyone else, and this is going to be kind of embodied, I suspect, by Aaron Paul's character, Caleb. Everyone else is leading this kind of very determined life. And I think that is going to be the kind of the theme that they're playing with here in season 3, which is, so humans, are we any more, are they any more in control of their lives than hosts were? Are the actual bad people not just humans as a whole, but the few people who hold this control and control everybody, hosts and humans? Are we going to see in season 3 Dolores changing her conceptualization of who are the bad guys from humans to this very, very small subset of humans who we're now getting as insight?
Right. And like I said, if they really are controlling human behavior and manipulating what's, future events with these algorithms, I mean, that is, definitely a form of slavery for humanity, because that takes away their choice and their free will, which is exactly what they did to the hosts in the park. So I think Dolores, if she does discover this, may be very sympathetic to the humans that are under that kind of control.
Yeah, and I think that if you go back to that first teaser trailer with Aaron Paul, I think there's a deliberate symmetry there between him and the hosts back in season 1. He's there feeling like he's just going through these kind of like set routines, things that he's being told he has to do, and he's searching for meaning, searching for something more. And that is exactly what Dolores, in her own way, was going through in season 1. So I think that she will meet a kindred spirit. And I think that the two of them, Dolores is still going to be the driving force here, it seems very clear. But the two of them will team up to work out who the real bad guys are. So I think that seems to be what we're about. And I think this is where all good science fiction starts to reflect back on our own reality and who we are. And I think that the algorithmic determinism is something that will really chime with us today. Are we who we are? Are our opinions what they are? Because this is what our echo chamber has given us. This is what Google tells us we need to be looking at. Is it, am I, and my opinions, are they really mine, or are they put there by some kind of overlord that I cannot truly understand? And that, I think, is where the kinship between the two of them is going to come in.
I agreed. I think it's interesting. I was actually looking back through some of my earlier writing for the Westworld Watchers site, and I remember in season 1 I had actually compared Dolores and Daenerys from Game of Thrones, and how
everything
they had
about Daenerys with you, isn't it?
Well, not everything, but I do think it's valid. They had similar kind of journeys, and they were both really wanting to liberate people that were oppressed. Dolores wanted to free the hosts, and Daenerys wanted to free the slaves. And so I'm just wondering if, Dolores is going to expand her view of who the oppressed are when she gets out of the park. I just hope that her story has a better ending.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I may mock, but I think that that's an entirely valid comparison to make. Both have a very strong view of trying to free people, and
And
they
questionable methods of doing
questionable.
so.
I'm glad
Yeah.
you said that. That I think is a questionable methods that you may agree with their heart, you may not always agree with where their head takes them. So I think that yeah, there's a very clear and um, if I were to try and offer some hope for the sort of the Dolores Daenerys comparison here, I would say that Daenerys had her King's Landing Dracarys moment right back at the end of season one, and that was where it was. And so what we're seeing now is this slow um, uh, under, increasing understanding of who are the oppressed. So she does all the killing, and then she starts to think about who it is that she might be trying to protect after all.
Right. And I think what's unique about the hosts, especially when they're free of their programming, is they probably have a much higher ability to adapt and to change than humans. We get kind of stuck in our routines. Like the host, we're kind of in our own little loops, and she's already broken free of that. And so I think that she will be much more able to take outside input and have that affect the way she reacts to different situations more so than a human would.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. I want to pick up on a question from Maura Lee, one of my patrons. Hi there, Maura, saying both Westworld and Star Trek: The Next Generation look at the role of androids, and this I think is a reference across to Star Trek Picard, which sort of debuted. I've not watched it yet, but I think it debuted across most of the world, maybe even today. Both of them look at the idea of sentience, compare and contrast the park hosts in Westworld with Data in Star Trek, the rights of human guests with the rights of the park hosts to be. So, how do you think that this is going to end up in terms of the rights? So, Maura goes on to say, what do you think is the final evolution of the park hosts' character arcs? Where do you think we're going to end up in terms of the the host? Because we've been talking a lot about Dolores, but we also get Bernard, who is also out in the outside world. And at the end of season two, he made it very clear that he did not agree with Dolores's general "I'm going to kill them all" approach, and was going to try and stop her. Where do you think this character arc for the hosts as a whole is going to end up?
It's a good question. And I have to say, for the ones in the park, I don't see a very happy ending for them unless significant change happens on the outside. Because no matter, how often they try to have an uprising, they can always bring in enough people from outside to quash it. So, like I said, there's going to have to be some significant upheaval, some way of taking control away from whatever entity is now controlling the park, whether it's Delos or whether it's this Insight, maybe. And that's something I think Dolores is going to have a big hand in. I'm interested about Bernard because from what little we've seen him, it looks like he's farming or something. He's like in some like agricultural looking area. I'm not really sure what he's up to. I almost kind of feel like he's trying to get away from everything, and I don't know. He's been through a lot of trauma, so I wouldn't blame him if he's trying to kind of maybe have some time to himself to figure out his next move. Maybe quietly watching Dolores from a distance to, ensure that she's not wreaking too much havoc. But I think what's a positive about Dolores is that she did tell him, like, she's basically letting him go free because she wants to have that counterbalance maybe someone to keep her from going overboard. So I think he will definitely have a big role to play in maybe tamping down some of her more violent tendencies. And I also think perhaps Maeve can do that as well if she gets out of the park again. I'm curious to know if she was able to retain any of her sentience, or did they completely wipe her memory? Um, so yeah, I'm really interested in to see what her story is going to be.
Yeah, I think we are at the very least going to have three storylines going on here, possibly four. I think Maeve seems to be, as I said, I think that she is going to be recreated by Felix, that she will reappear as a character in Warworld. And I suspect that she will know who she is. And her mission seems to be to free in a not in this kind of like violent, bloody way that Dolores has, but to free the hosts so that they aren't just stuck to their routines and all the rest of it, that they actually get their freedom in and of themselves within the park. So that seems to be the first thing. The second thing, Dolores, we've talked about already. The third, Bernard, who we've not seen much of. As you say, the only shots we had were from that trailer where he seemed to be on this commune somewhere outside civilization. We don't know what's going on there, so it's hard to draw too many conclusions, to be honest. But he is clearly going to be one of the main characters in this, and he is clearly trying to oppose Dolores just killing everybody. Because don't forget, Bernard, out of everyone, is the character who is most about the balance between humans and host. That is where he is at. He is about trying to create harmony between these two different groups of people. So that is where he is going to go. Maybe that vision of trying to create harmony leads him to some kind of like happy commune somewhere where everyone's talking about peace and love in a kind of 60s way. I don't know. I suspect he's going to be slightly more directional than that and actually actively try and oppose Dolores. But there seems to be at least three different timelines. My guess, in terms of the time gap that we were talking about, is that I don't think that the showrunners will be able to avoid um, or resist is probably the best word. I don't think they'll be able to resist trying to play with timelines so we don't know exactly what's happening at any given time.
Right.
Think about The Witcher season 1, if you saw that, where the first 2 or 3 episodes, if you've not read the books, you're not 100% sure what's going on, but something in you is like ringing a bell going, these don't seem to be at the same. Why aren't these characters actually mixing? Is it different times? So I think that is probably more likely what we're going to happen. What we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see the same kind of playing games to keep everything hidden from us. I think they're going to be slowly telling us what's going on. How does that sound to you? Do you think that sounds roughly the shape of it?
Yeah, I agree. I'm also curious about the pearls that Dolores stole when she left the island of the park. I think she had, what, 5 of them? And we know one was Bernard, one was maybe some kind of, it could have been Charlotte. And I know they did make some replicas of some of the humans that worked for Delos, but it could be anybody really. Clementine, who knows? So I'm curious to see who else she brought with her. Is she going to recreate their host form in that lab that Arnold built outside the park? And we know that Charlotte's going to be around and she's going to be involved in whatever Dolores is cooking up. So very interested to see what kind of plans they hatch.
Yeah, I mean, so she took out 5, and the interviews I've seen with the showrunners say that they didn't actually have a forward plan. They knew she took out 5 at that time, so they spent a reasonable amount of time debating after season 2 had finished, debating who the 5 were. Now, yeah, clearly we've got Bernard is there. I think if they're being true to it, you have to try and get into the mind of Dolores and say, who would she want on the outside? And I think that who she would want on the outside are loyal people, perhaps Clementine, perhaps Teddy. I don't know. It's just
the question about Teddy, though. So she sent him to that, whatever that made up, the Sublime, and the hosts that they found when they found those bodies, their pearls had been wiped clean, so there was no more information on them. So if he was sent there, I don't think that she can bring him back unless, and they blew up the kind of backup server that had all of their information so that they couldn't recreate them. So I don't think she can bring Teddy back, unfortunately.
I mean, maybe I'm slightly more cynical than you.
I mean, she could maybe recreate him. I'm probably smart enough to do that.
Yeah, I'm of the view that, I mean, there are a couple of ways they could get around. If they want to get around this, they could say, oh, well, she did a cut and paste of him when she had a few seconds and we didn't see her. Or they could say, with Bernard, it wasn't just here's a pearl, that's you. He was recreated from the memories of people.
Yes, true.
And so if she has got the memory, I mean, and she spent many years with Teddy, could she recreate him from her memories? Quite possibly. So I think that in Westworld, I don't think we can say that anyone is fundamentally gone. They might be dead, but I don't think they're necessarily gone. So yeah, maybe it's cynical, but maybe it's just my undying hope that we get another sight of Anthony Hopkins when we really shouldn't.
Right.
I don't know.
But I think, I think Clementine would be a good bet. Maybe Angela, if she can recreate her from
Angela
memory.
would be fantastic.
And then we already know Bernard was one. That leaves 2 more. So I'm wondering about whoever's in Charlotte now, because she had Dolores's pearl in the Charlotte body when she left. So what did she put in Charlotte's body that once she recreated her own? I'm curious.
Yes. And I think that is that's quite an important one, because when the showrunners have talked about, yes, she took out 5 pearls, but they say there are 3 hosts out in the real world.
Okay.
And that implies that we've got Bernard, we've got Dolores, and we've got someone else who is whoever is in Charlotte. Those are the 3 hosts we have out in there's another couple perhaps that will come online later, but it's the who is Charlotte is the real thing. And I don't know. My best guess is Angela, but it could be someone like Teddy.
Me, and I don't know if she was able to get these. It's possible. If there are ones that exist other than the one that they made for James Delos, if they made them for other Delos employees, is there a Charlotte one? Because I think that could be very useful, especially if you want to infiltrate a corporation like Delos, because she has all the memories, she knows all the people, she knows what they're up to, and I think that would be very useful to have. Or even someone like William, if you could get a hold of his. I think that, if she really wanted to infiltrate and figure out how to take them down from the inside, I think those would be very, very useful.
Yes, but I think that, and I agree, I think what we've got is the Charlotte host, because it is a host, will be trying to do some kind of infiltration from what we've seen from the trailer. she seems to be sort of mixing with the humans and all the rest of it. So whoever this is someone very loyal and very much on Dolores's side, which is why I'm thinking Angela. But it might not be. But it's someone along those lines. We've had a couple of super chats actually while I've been talking. Actually, one before we went live from Maura Lee saying just a show of love and support for both your channels and all the fabulous content. Thank you, Maura. I really appreciate that. And we had another one just now from Megan V. Hi there, Megan, saying, I'm interested on your thoughts on the Man in Black's ending. The possibility that he's now in a fidelity test. So I will happily throw this one to you. So the context, for those who don't remember, this is 2 years ago, by the way, guys. I should probably have prefaced all this. This happened. I love the fact that they do this. That they don't rush season by season with Westworld, but they actually make it right before they do it. But it does mean that between seasons, there's quite a big gap. So you have to like go cast your mind back and go, okay, so what happened at the end of last season? I will do a couple of like recap videos if you're interested in that. But in terms of this question, the sort of the teaser ending of season 2 was the Man in Black apparently in the future at some point having some kind of fidelity test, which means him being a host human hybrid of sorts. Does this actually work? Can he actually carry on being him within this immortal host body, which was obviously the dream way back in the beginning of time? So, Vanessa, what do you think was going on there? And do you think we're going to pick up on that in some way in season 3?
Yeah, it was a little confusing. From what I understand, it was very, very far into the future when this happened, both from the interviews I read and also just because the site where this is located is very rundown looking. It looks like it's been out of use for a while, except for, this test that's been running. So my thoughts are that either this is at some point in the future when the robots have pretty much taken over the world, and maybe this is just an eternal punishment for William, because I do think this is kind of a version of hell for him, having to be interviewed by the daughter he murdered for all eternity, and having to learn each time that he's not really him anymore. He's, basically a simulation. So either that or, maybe robots didn't take over, but Dolores or someone who has a grudge against William was able to, take over this remote spot and do this. But I do think it was functioning as a punishment more than an actual test. And let's see if we can make this work.
Yes, I think I agree. I think, though, Ed Harris is back for season 3. Is that right with your Westworld Watchers hat on?
Yes.
Is that the inside goss?
From what I understand, yes, he will be back. I don't know. Like I said, there's been very little information that's come out. There have been some set pictures that was focused on the World, the World War II park area, and then Dolores in the real world, and that's really all we know so far. I've heard a couple of rumors. I think I heard a rumor that Simon Quarterman was seen on set at the World location. And he played Simon, not Simon. The name escapes me. Though the one who is a jerk who wrote all the storylines, but then he befriended Maeve and helped her. My mind's a blank.
The English guy.
Yes, and I can't think of his name.
They're all jerks. It's fine.
Yeah. Anyway, but so there were rumors that he was spotted, but they had. I just think back to Game of Thrones. Yes, I know we're back on Game of Thrones again, but there was one season where I think it was season 5, they had Shay, Sybil Kelly came on set in Marine, just for people to wonder, like, why in the world is she here on set? So I think they're just messing with people. So maybe they could just be messing with people. Who knows? But maybe he'll come back and host for. Maybe Elsie will come back in host form. You never know with the show what they're going to do. But yes, from what I understand, he will be back for this season. So the last we saw of him, he had, his fingers were blown off. He was being carried off the beach, probably getting medical attention. But yeah, I mean, I'm really unsure what his future is going to be, considering that he did murder his daughter. He probably won't be punished for it. I'm sure he'll say that, the security guys did it or something. He'll get out of it somehow. But like I said, what kind of mental state is he going to be in? Is he going to be even able to function as part of the board of Delos? Is he even going to want to do that anymore? So I have really, he's probably my biggest question mark as to what he's going to be doing this season. And as far as the fidelity test, like I said, I think that's very far into the future. So I don't think it's something they'll revisit this season, but it could come into play later on.
Yeah, I would agree with you that this is also my biggest question mark. The trailers pick up on the things they want you to see rather than necessarily all of the action that we're going to be seeing. And we didn't really see much of anything, I think, of Ed Harris. He is going to be there, but the big bad corporation is Insight out in the real world. Is he now gonna retake control of Delos? Delos, if you think about it, in terms of if this actually happened, would anyone ever want to go there again? Probably not.
Probably not under their management anyway.
Exactly. I mean, this is like an elite holiday destination that suddenly led to literally dozens, if not hundreds, of murders of incredibly important, rich, powerful people. If the Ed Harris, the Man in Black character, survives and still owns Delos, they may still own that island, they may still own the parks, but is anyone going there? I'm not sure that they would. It would be a completely different world. So the fact that they've said nothing about it really, really fascinates me and makes me wonder where they're going to go with it. I think they're probably going to take his character all the way through from being this a character in charge of everything, it would appear early on, to being a character who's really quite run down and owned by everything, by the world and all the rest of it. And I think that's going to be a fascinating character arc to read through. Lost for Words, thank you so much for the super chat. That's incredibly generous, and says, because it's fabulous to see Vanessa. It is fabulous to see Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
It's a delight to have Vanessa on the channel, as always. And we were talking just before we went on air about when we get to Westworld Season 3. I will be doing... as I did last time for season 2, I will be doing my pre-show live streams at 5 o'clock Eastern time every week just before the show, just to chat through things. And I will make sure I have Vanessa on as much as I possibly can, because big fan. Okay, so what we always do roughly halfway through these live streams is give both me a chance to just explain things that are happening on my channel and also my guests. So Vanessa, in a moment, I will ask you what's going on with you, with your art stuff, with the podcast and all the rest of what's coming up. But for those who follow this channel, we have got coming up. I'm now looking, as you probably spotted, I'm looking at not just A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings. I've expanded out into The Witcher. Tried a couple of videos on that. I think people like them. Let me know if you do enjoy them, and I'll be carrying on doing those as long as people want them. But what I really want to talk about this time is my second channel, which is my passion project, my audio narration. The Well-Told Tale. Now, the big news last week, I did a big relaunch. That is now a podcast. So if you are into podcasts, if you enjoy podcasts, have a look for The Well Told Tale. It should be on wherever you get your podcasts from. I tried to make sure it's on all of the main places, so do go and do that. The big thing, if you want to help this channel, if you want to help The Well Told Tale, the big thing you can do is leave a comment there, particularly if you're on iTunes. The things you learn when you're investigating podcasts, iTunes still, they're like 70% of the market of podcasts. I didn't realize this, but it's huge. So if you want to get anywhere, then you have to get in there. If you want to help this channel, if you want to help The Well Told Tale, then right now, the best thing you can do is leave a positive comment over there for the on iTunes for The Well Told Tale. I really would appreciate that. The idea is in the future that the YouTube channel and the podcast will be doing the same thing at the same time. I'm just syncing them up at the moment, but I realized that what I needed to do was finish off the story that I started before I took a little pause, which was At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, which is a fantastic story. That I've now got to the end of that story. I think I've probably got maybe a week or so to fill just to get everything synced up. But if you're interested in that, please go and check out my second channel, The Well Told Tale. I always say thank you to my patrons at this point because I honestly cannot do what I do without your support. On The Well Told Tale, my patrons have been long-suffering and exceptionally patient with me, and I am hugely grateful. I took a little bit of a break, and so as a little bit of a thank you, if you are a patron of The Well Told Tale, if you go onto the Patreon, then you will find, if you give me your address, I will send you a little thank you through the post. And the next payment, which comes out at the end of this month, I'm going to skip just as a sort of a thank you because there was a month or so of no content and it seems fair not to charge you. So that's happened, which did make me think, if you do want to be a patron of The Well Told Tale, now is probably a good time to do it, because if you join before the end of the month, there's no payment, so you get 1 month free. So there's that. But patrons of Deep Geek also want to thank you. I honestly cannot do this without me. If you are interested in becoming a patron, if you want to support this channel, or if you want to get access to the stuff I do exclusively for my patrons, there is a link down in the description. So thank you so much. But Vanessa, I said I'd love to know what you're up to coming up. What's happening in the next few weeks in your world?
So we will be ramping up our coverage of Westworld as we get closer to the season 3 date on Westworld Watchers. So I will be writing over there. I'll be recapping each episode after it airs every week. We are on a bit of a hiatus with the Knights cast, but hopefully with the House of the Dragon, which they're predicting to come out in 2022. Hopefully there'll be some filming news, some production news coming out. So we'll be covering that there at Watchers on the Wall and Knights cast. And as I said, I've started this Stephen King podcast. We're covering The Outsider, which is airing on HBO now on Sundays at 9 p.m. So we are recapping each episode of that. And we're kind of in a little Stephen King renaissance right now with a bunch of adaptations coming out. I know at least 2 this year, Lizzie's Story and The Stand, which I'm very, very excited for. It's probably my favorite novel he's written, and really can't wait to see what they do with this new adaptation. So we'll definitely be covering those as they come out as well. So definitely come check us out at Needful King. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Needful King. And I will be at Con of Thrones. Like I said, hopefully I will have some of my art on display there. So I've been trying to focus on getting some pieces ready for that in July.
Excellent. I'm intrigued by this. The Stand is also my favorite Stephen King story. What's the adaptation? Is it a TV show? Is it a film?
I think it's a 10-episode miniseries, basically like one season series on CBS All Access, and it's actually going to have James Marsden as Stu Redman.
Oh.
So, which is another reason I'm wondering if we're going to see him. Probably not, because I think he's actually filming The Stand in Canada, I believe, right now.
Okay, Good. And the other thing, what was the other thing I was going to pick up on? Oh, the Dark Tower. And you're now my resident Stephen King expert, and so I'm
Yes,
going to ask you a question. What's going on with the Dark Tower? I keep on hearing
it's
that it's being picked up and dropped, and what's happening?
it's been dropped. So they
Okay.
are no longer developing. It was at Amazon. They're no longer developing it, but from what I understand, they are still shopping the scripts they wrote for the pilot around to some different options. So perhaps someone else will pick it up.
Okay, so there is still hope for it because
Yeah, it's possible.
okay, okay. So I
I think
mean,
the main reason Amazon didn't go forward is it didn't really fit with the tone of the kinds of series they wanted to develop, and they're really focusing a lot of energy on Lord of the Rings, understandably. So it just wasn't a good fit for them at this point. But, it's definitely a possibility someone else could be interested in it. And I think it would be a shame if they don't get to do something, because we need a good adaptation of the Dark Tower for sure.
we do. And for those who don't know, there was a film that I was
We
excited
don't try not
about
to think about the film.
before it happened, but it didn't quite hit the mark, which is a
Yeah.
shame. But it was it's a series of novels, isn't it? Really, by Stephen
Yes.
King,
Mhm.
in a kind of like a supernatural gunslinger kind of vibe. Is that
Yes.
fair?
Yes. And they kind of
Um,
cross different parallel universes. It's very, very interesting, complex. Maybe not quite as complex as A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's a lot of characters, a lot of storylines to keep up with.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that I am keeping an eye out for when it does have a proper adaptation, I have to say. Um, Other things that I've sort of got half an eye out on at the moment are things like the Wheel of Time. For those, I would love. This is one of those things where I kind of throw out at live streams just to see what the reaction is from people. Is this something you'd want me to cover or not? The Wheel of Time is a sort of an epic fantasy series by Robert Jordan. It got finished off by Brandon Sanderson. And they are making this is an Amazon series that they're filming at the moment. They started filming, I think, in about September. So I think there's a reasonable chance towards the end of this year or maybe at the beginning of next year, we're going to see it. Um, my feel is that this is probably Amazon dipping their toe into the fantasy fiction world before the Lord of the Rings, that they've obviously thrown huge amounts of money at just to sort of test out a few things. But it's a franchise, it's a literary series in and of its own right. And it's something I know a lot of people have read or at least started to read. It's quite a big series. So I would love to know if people are interested in that, whether that's something people want me to cover. Vanessa, did you ever read The Wheel of Time?
I have not. I've been pestered to read it by a friend of mine. It's actually the same person that told me to read A Song of Ice and Fire. And it's not that I don't want to, I just haven't had the time. So when things slow down, if that ever happens, I definitely plan on picking it up at some point.
Okay, I mean, I think that, to be honest, I think it's fair. They are chunky novels, and there are a lot
Yes,
of
I've
them.
heard. I've heard. Yeah.
And the pace does. I mean, I've said this before. The pace does slow down the further into the novels you go, which it's for the casual reader slightly dispiriting. I think that for the person who's bought in, then perhaps this adds to the world. Yeah, I'd be interested. Yeah, as Anna Iglesias says, 15 books. It's a lot of books, and they're like George R. R. Martin size books as well. They're big
Wow. Yeah.
old
I'll
tomes.
just need to take like 5 months off work and maybe I can knock those out.
Well, my new plan is a complete digression. My new plan is I'm getting audiobooks and then I'm listening to them when I'm at the gym. When everyone else is like playing their pumping music, I'm listening to The Witcher or Wheel of Time or whatever. So
I'd have to
uh,
cure myself of my podcast addiction if I were going to do that.
well,
Can't even keep with my podcast. So, yeah.
I'm sure there are many excellent, the well-told tale, excellent podcasts out there at the moment for you to be
Shameless
choosing
plug.
from. Uh, It's my channel. I get to do this.
I know.
Okay, so let's pick up, and I've got a couple more questions from my patrons, slightly broader. Guys, now's the time. We're going to move on, I think, from just talking about Westworld. If you've got questions about Song of Ice and Fire, maybe the Lord of the Rings series, whatever it is, now is the time to drop them in there. I'm going to try and pick up as many questions from the chat as we can. And a couple of questions from Fred Versteeg over on Patreon saying, my question is very broad, so I won't mind if you haven't both got an answer, but I think we're the kind of people who like answering things. The last decade or even 2 decades, fantasy and sci-fi are very popular. Never seen this before, even in the golden age of Star Wars. Have you got a thought on why now fantasy and sci-fi are so popular? I mean, what do you think, sort of at a broad level, Vanessa? Why do you think now it's got so popular?
Um, well, I think it probably started a little bit with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, because that was just so well done, and it was popular even with people who hadn't read the novels, and it really showed what was possible, that you could do live action fantasy well, realistically looking, beautiful, just gorgeous cinematography, and just a fantastic story. It was just so well adapted. And then you had Harry Potter come out, which, so many people grew up reading those books. And then, of course, you had all of the movies as well. And then, of course, Game of Thrones, which is the juggernaut of all of them, really just showed what you could do and how popular fantasy could really be and how you could really capture that audience. So I think we're just a lot of different factors converge to make it just the optimal time for those kind of stories to be told, which is wonderful for me because those are my favorite genres as well. So I'm just so excited to see all of the different options they're coming out with.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. I think that there have been a few things that have done it exceptionally well, like the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, like the Harry Potter films, like Game of Thrones, certainly the early series, that they did so well that it showed that there was money in this to start with for people who were trying to make money out of TV and film, but also there was art, without trying to sound too pretentious about it, but the Lord of the Rings films were really good. Game of Thrones won huge amounts of awards, rightly, because it was really, really well done. I think that technology probably also plays a part in this, in that if you go back to the 60s and you have Star Trek and you have Doctor Who, the graphics weren't great. Let's be fair. It was like, they were like doing this when the starship was moving or whatever. It was just, it wasn't fantastic stuff. Nowadays, even mid-budget science fiction and fantasy looks pretty good, and high-budget fantasy and science fiction looks amazing. So finally, we can have realistic-looking dragons on TV, which is a huge advance, and means that the amount of things that you can show has increased exponentially within the fantasy world and sci-fi world. So that, I think, for me, that is those are the two things that, I mean, as you say, the quality of what has happened is huge.
And
And
also, I
also,
think
you go.
I was just going to say they've been able to show that you can gear these stories to a more adult audience, that these aren't just genres for kids anymore. And I think that's also a huge benefit especially as far as profitability goes. You're going to want to be able to market yourselves to an older crowd. And I think they've been able to do that very well.
Yeah, I'm just getting distracted by the chat is now trying to give me tips for the gym. I wasn't asking for tips for the gym. I was simply trying to say, when I'm at the gym, this is what I listen to. I'm not there getting my pumping tunes, but thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And superhero, as Scott McCloy is saying, superhero movies too. I think that it's not a coincidence that the graphics have improved exponentially at the same time that interest in superhero movies has improved exponentially. Yeah, the old like classic Christopher Reeve Superman things. They could do like him flying about and all the rest of it. But the nowadays, what they can do with graphics means that you can actually have a battle between lots of superheroes at once, and that makes a huge amount of difference. Andrew Kay, no, you do not need my complete gym routine. The in terms of the Fred Versteeg had another question in terms of sort of broadly what we like, what seems to work is that there has been a change away, obviously, from just a weekly episodic approach to this kind of binge approach. And I think the biggest thing has been The Witcher, certainly in our world, where they just dropped all of the episodes at once. We're used to Game of Thrones, Westworld being every week, but then that happened all in one go. Fred was saying, do you prefer a show with weekly episodes so you can discuss it in the old way with people, or binging it like The Witcher? Pardon me. So, what do you think, Vanessa? Do you prefer the old way, or do you quite like just being able to binge stuff?
I think it depends on what it is. For I definitely like shows like Game of Thrones or Westworld. I recently watched all of The Mandalorian. I prefer them to parcel them out. If it's a show that is going to get people talking, I would rather be able to do it on a week-to-week basis so that I can actually keep up with the conversation. Usually, when they drop an entire season at once, I don't have time to watch all of those episodes. And by the time that I finally get around to it, the conversation has kind of moved on to the next thing. So I personally think it is even to the benefit of the show itself to kind of draw out that conversation over several weeks because you keep it in the forefront of people's minds. It's not, a few days of conversation and then everyone forgets about it and moves on to the next big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I personally prefer week by week. I think it does depend on the show to a extent, and I think that we approach this from what we want. Um, I like week by week. I like going through and discussing stuff and having mysteries that sort of like slowly unravel themselves over a period of time, rather than it all happens in one night or two nights because I've got a bit of spare time and I can binge it. Um, and I like everyone being at the same place in something. I like
Right.
being when we had Game of Thrones or Westworld, we all have the same mystery at the same time and we're all trying to figure it out. I like that rather than with The Witcher, say it was like, have you watched it yet? Oh, I'm only on episode 2, or it meant that you didn't know where people were at. Whereas
Right.
things that happen episodically, you can understand where everyone is at
Mm-hmm.
to give people a chance to watch it. So that's my preference. But and I said this, I think I was on a live stream over on Kyle's channel actually when we were talking about this very issue. I think we have to understand that from someone like Netflix's perspective, they're not thinking about that. What they're thinking about is the fact that they've got 100 different shows they've got on order, and they've got 2 new shows a week, and they're wanting people to be moving on to the next show all the time. So
Right.
they actually want people to binge The Witcher in one week and then move on to The Crown and then move on to whatever. I mean, I don't know how many people move
Yes.
on from Witcher to The Crown, but the point is there. They have their thing that they want people to move on from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and they're always pushing the next thing. I don't think in the long run that's actually good for their business model, just a
Mm,
personal position. But
yeah.
I completely understand that that is where they're at, that they're just trying to always push the next
Right.
thing.
And if you're a streaming service that can continually push out new content like that, and I'm not sure how they can keep that pace up, but it seems like it would take a lot of money to continually churn out new content. But I mean, if that's your business model and it's working, that's great. Or someone like HBO who can't really do that, I think the episodic way is much better for them. And like I said, I just prefer it. I like everyone being on the same page. You don't have to worry so much about spoiling others, because hopefully people are at least keeping up on a week-to-week basis. It's just hard when, one person binges the entire season the first day, and then, like, someone like me who has to wait a month before they can finally get around to it. You can't help but be spoiled. If you go on any kind of social media, you already know the entire plot of the season within the first few days. So I mean, it's just personal preference, but yeah, I like being kind of kept a little bit in the dark and having to kind of learn as you go.
And I think what's interesting is how the other sort of on-demand channels are playing this. So Disney obviously decided with The Mandalorian they were going to go weekly. That mean they didn't go just weekly. They did a couple of shows per week at the beginning and end of the season. But they clearly liked this model of having weekly new episodes. What I'm interested in is what Amazon do, not just from a personal perspective about what's going to happen with the Lord of the Rings, but they seem to have been playing with both models. Some things they bring out week by week, other things, Good Omens, I remember they just dropped in one whole lump. They seem to be like playing with both options and trying to figure out what works. So I think that the biggest indicator about what's going to happen, as I said, with Lord of the Rings is what they do with Wheel of Time. Because if they do that as just one big binge dump, then I suspect that is what they're thinking about doing with the Lord of the Rings, and seeing whether it works.
From a
maybe
profitability perspective, though, for these streaming services that you have to pay a subscription to, unless you're continually adding new content, people can binge what they want to see and then just cut off the subscription until you finally release something else they want to see. I think if you want to keep people for the long term, being able to parcel things out so they're, forced to, for lack of a better word, to keep that subscription, to keep watching, I think in the long run is a better way to go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think from Amazon's perspective, because they are linked in with, and this is the world we live in, Amazon Prime, I suspect it's the same in America as it is in this country, is that it's about the delivery of stuff as well as the TV. So you get Amazon Prime,
Yep.
you get everything.
Yep.
So the way that tends to work is you pay your whatever it is amount per year to get everything. And what they seem to be about is what's the tipping point that will push people into paying for a year rather than
I do it
paying on
for
an
the 2-day
annual
delivery,
subscription.
but
Yeah,
I don't do it
well,
for the videos. That's
yeah,
just a bonus.
exactly. But what would push you over to having Amazon Prime? And it's probably not the same as being the monthly subscription for HBO or whatever that you have to keep on going with it all the one. And then when Game of Thrones finished and they would try with True Detective or whatever else they had going on, or Westworld or something, that was the way that their business model worked, was that you pay each month in order to keep on getting the good quality content. So I don't know. I don't have high hopes, but I'd love it if they do go weekly. It would it works so much better. Leaf Underhill saying, I like binging, but of course weekly is better for YouTubers. Yep, it is better for YouTubers. Aziz suggested YouTube pay them to space out things like The Witcher. I think that Netflix are much bigger than the amount of money that YouTube would pay them for YouTubers. We're YouTubers who care about things like The Witcher are incredibly small beer to YouTube and to the Witcher and Netflix. I can assure you of that. It's not where the big money is for them. Okay, guys, this is those are my questions for my patrons. So now is the time to drop some questions into the chat. We'll try and cover off as many of them as we possibly can. We'll probably go for about another 15-20 minutes. I'm going to just I can't remember whether I asked you last time, but I'll ask you again because I know you're big on the Targaryens. House of the Dragon. Now we've been told basically now that we have to wait for this. It's going to be a while. It's going to be probably 2022. They are just starting writing it. What's your sort of best take on, firstly, on what is it going to be about, not just about Fire and Blood, but sort of specifically, and what is it that you're sort of looking for in it?
Yeah, so I'm curious as to where they're going to start because I've seen some things that talk about it being about the Targaryen Civil War, so the Dance of the Dragons, but I've also seen several outlets reporting that it's starting 300 years before the events of Game of Thrones, which would put it around the time of Aegon's conquest. So I don't know if they're intentionally being vague or trying to confuse us, or if they're not sure where they're going to start. I don't know. I would love personally to see the conquest. I think it might be interesting to do. Well, you don't have to adapt the entire book of Fire and Blood, but if you wanted to do like a season or two of the conquest, and then maybe jump forward in time to Jaehaerys and Alysanne's rule, and then maybe show some of that, and then jump forward in time again, I think that might be an interesting way to approach it. But I just want to see complexity. I want to see interesting characters. I don't want them to be one note or black and white or good guys, bad guys. I want to see like early Game of Thrones with a lot of political intrigue, and sometimes you don't know who you want to root for. My concern with the Dance of the Dragons is that when you read about it, I know that I personally pull for the blacks. I think Rhaenyra had the better claim, but neither side is really likable. So I'm curious how they're going to approach that, and if they're going to make one side more sympathetic so that it's easier for us to identify with them and have someone to root for. So yeah, it's really kind of an open book. They have a lot of different directions they can go. But yeah, I want to see good storytelling and not just all action, shock, and CGI.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I mean, I think so. George R. R. Martin is involved in this, and I mean, the optimistic part of me suggests that perhaps the slow rate at which this is being written is partly because he is concentrating on the thing, I'm not going to name it, but the thing I hope he's concentrating on, and finishing writing that. But what he has hinted about, and let's not forget, this was what he says the first thing he pitched to HBO as a successor show. So this is where his initial heart was for it, was that you should look to the couple of short stories that he published that were the basis of, or they fed into Fire and Blood, one of which was The Rogue Prince, which is about Daemon Targaryen, and one of which I always forget the name of, but it's about the two princesses, and is about the start of the Dance of the Dragons. Now, he says, and then after that, dig into Fire and Blood if you're wanting to know what the new show is going to be about. So, for my money, this is about the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, and then later seasons will be actually the Dance of the Dragons. So I don't think, I mean, I suspect the 300 years ago was just sort of a vague thing when they didn't really know what they were doing. I don't think we're going to see much of Aegon's invasion. I would love to see it. I think it'd be fascinating, but I don't think, maybe in flashback, but I don't think that's going to be in the main thing.
Well, from what I remember, Casey Bloys addressed it during the TCA, Television Critics Association, when they go and do their promotions for upcoming shows. And when it was, I think, the same time he mentioned it was going to air in 2022. I want to say he himself said the 300 years before Game of Thrones. I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and look, but I know it was said recently. So that's why I'm confused. So if it's said recently, and surely they're already working on it, why would you say that unless, like I said, unless you're being intentionally vague about the time period?
I mean, I think it's intentionally vague. That's my take. I mean, I might be wrong. My take is that they are being intentionally vague. I think that the way that seems to have been is that George R. R. Martin pitched it as this is a history of House Targaryen. I'm about to do a history of House Targaryen. This is about early days and the beginning of the end for them and all the rest of it. I don't think the beginning of the end is the invasion. I think that if they were to include the invasion, which is, you know, a long time before the Dance of the Dragons, then we're looking at huge time jumps and lots of different actor changes and all the rest of it. I think they will want to focus in. I think they will want something as low risk, let's say, as they possibly can. And I think as low risk as they possibly can is Targaryens, dragons, political intrigue. Let's get it back to where Game of Thrones was when everybody thought Game of Thrones was the best thing ever. Let's just go there when we've got Starks and Targaryens, and we've got Tyrells, and we've got, you know, Baratheons. We've got all of the people that we've heard of and know, and let's introduce a few high towers. They sound quite cool. That's the kind of thing that I think that we're going to be going with, not this you know, one man and his two sisters with three dragons just conquering a land. That I don't think is going to be the main focus of it. I think it's going to be, we've got an established Iron Throne, King's Landing, and all the rest of it. Let's get into the political intrigue.
I guess it's a little bit of wishful thinking on my part, just because I want Catherine Winnick to play Visenya so bad. If you don't know, she is Lagertha on Vikings, and I think she would be perfect in that role. But maybe she could be Rhaenyra. I don't know. She needs to be a Targaryen on the show at some point. But yeah, I think there would need to be significant buildup before we actually get to the dance, because one, I think they need to make sure that it's going to be successful before they spend all of that money on all the CGI for all of the dragons and all of the battles that would be involved. And two, they need to make us care about the players before they get into this enormous civil war, because if we don't care, it's just, you know, pretty visuals to look at, and that's not enough to keep interest in the show, I don't think.
No, and I would agree. And I think that if I were them, and I'm not them clearly, but if I were them, I would do season one as the build up to the effective declaration of war. So we have quite a lot of detailed stuff in Fire and Blood about this moment when effectively we get to the declaration of war, when we get the High Tower sort of hiding away with a dead king's body and trying to figure out how do we claim the crown and all the rest of it. And we've got the other side hiding away at Dragonstone, waiting to take power. And I think that that's the point that I would end season one. I would have season one as the build up to that moment, and you get flashbacks to Jaehaerys, probably, who is making these fundamental decisions about who should be succeeding him and all the rest of it. So I think that is what I would do, and I would use season one to be introducing all of these characters, some of which we will sort of vaguely understand about, like the Targaryens. Others they didn't have in Game of Thrones. I think, to their loss, but I understood why they had to keep it relatively slimline, like the High Towers and the Velaryons and houses like that that were hugely powerful at the time, but um, in Game of Thrones, not so important. So I think that's what I would do, and then season 2 onward would be actually the development of this war as it happens. So not focusing always on the big battles, but actually what's happening with the individual people and the characters of people like the Rogue Prince and all the rest of it, who are fascinating characters. So I think that would be where I would go with it, certainly. Um, and George R. R. Martin's hints that this is about characters like Daemon Targaryen, Alicent Hightower, and all the rest of it, that seems to imply that that is where the focus of it's going to be. But they've only written one episode. Let's stop. Speculation has to be relatively limited now, because they were writing it in order to have a pilot, and then they got an entire season ordered, and they went, oh, okay, so I have to write an entire season now. So that's where they're at, where they haven't written the entire season yet. They've just written the pilot.
I think this could be very interesting depending on how successful it is, because they really could keep it going for quite a while and, bring in new cast members as we transition to different periods of history. Because, you have the Dance of the Dragons, then you have the reign of Aegon III, and then you have, Baelor the Blessed, and you have Aegon the Unworthy and the Blackfire Rebellion. So there's just so much material that you can draw from. So I'm curious if this is going to be, we're going to focus on the Dance of the Dragons. We're going to tell, a complete story, and then we're going to end it. And then maybe at some point we'll do another project, or will they say, this is doing fantastic. This is a really popular show. Let's continue with this anthology and go in and adapt more time periods in the Targaryen history. So I'm curious to see how they're going to, or whether they're going to continue with it, or whether it's going to be just, a limited amount of time and be done with it.
Yeah. I think they will keep it relatively focused, is my best guess. I mean, even those of us who read Fire and Blood a few times still get confused between all the different Targaryens with the same name and all the rest of it. So I think that they will be wanting to keep it as simple as possible to get as huge an audience as they possibly can. That's just my take on why they, at least part of the reason why they didn't go for the Jane Goldman series, and why they did go for this one, is that they just think this is the banker, this is the clear winner, this is the easy thing that we could do that will get everybody watching HBO again.
It's probably right. Sorry, someone wanted to be on camera apparently. So, this is Zorro.
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 That's the best name ever.
Thanks.
Fantastic.
Say hello.
Well, I'm slightly distracted now.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm gonna start wrapping this one up now. Donald Peoples, thank you so much for the super chat, saying thanks for the great content. Always a pleasure. And always a pleasure to see you there in the chat. Mushroom Tulkus 420 is saying Mushroom. Yes, he is the character above everything I would like to see in House of the Dragon. For those who don't know, he's the court jester, is probably the way to say it. He's a dwarf like Tyrion, and he has written an alternative history of the Targaryen reign, with his inside knowledge, that when you read Fire and Blood, part of you goes, that sounds quite true, because Fire and Blood is deliberately written by a maester in a way that is quite biased, and so the maester often references across to what Mushroom says, in a kind of a sneering attitude, as of course it wasn't like that. This much degenerate character here, but
Yeah.
part of you goes, oh, maybe.
It almost makes me sad that Peter Dinklage played Tyrion, because he probably would do a fantastic job as Mushroom. I would love to see him in that role.
Yes, absolutely. I would too. And in fact, I would very happily see him in that role, even though he was Tyrion. I have to say, I would suspend my disbelief for that. It has to be said. Zorro is getting a huge amount of love in the chat, by the way.
Thanks, everyone. He does not like to be separated from me, so sorry.
Oh, so sweet. Dan the dog is very happy to be separated from me, so that's fine. I'm okay. He falls asleep very quickly. For those who don't know, greyhounds, they have a huge amount of energy for when they're sprinting, but the rest of the time they just laze about. So he's over there having a little nap. Okay, let's. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Vanessa, why don't you just remind everyone where we can find you on the internet?
Sure. So if you want to check out my writing at Watchers on the Wall and Westworld Watchers, please feel free. You can find me on Twitter at VKColeArtist. You can also check out some of my art at VKColeArt on Instagram. And I also have a Facebook page, VKColeArt. You can also go to my website as well, vkcoleart.com. And yeah, please do check out our Needful King podcast if you're a Stephen King fan. We're having a lot of fun with it. And like I said, there's a lot of great adaptations coming up that we're going to cover.
Excellent. I will actually check that out. I'm a big fan. And did you do that with who do you do that with? Remind us.
So you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Needful King. All of the audio will be linked there. But you can also find us on Apple Podcast, Needful King podcast there, SoundCloud, and Podbean as well.
But it's not just you, is it?
No, it's my friend Sam, who also does the Night's Cast podcast and writes for Watchers on the Wall.
Excellent. And for those who...
And that's at Sansa Snark on Twitter.
She has been on this channel a couple of times as well. That was why I was trying to prompt you to.
Yes.
She a friend of the channel. So if you're a fan of Sansa Snark, she is also on that. I'm going to take you off for just one moment, Vanessa, because if you are watching this not live, then you will find somewhere up around here at the end of the video will be a whole load of links, or one link to a whole load of videos for other live streams I've been doing, and somewhere around here will be a link to my Patreon page. But I'd also love to encourage you, if you do love classic science fiction and fantasy, then do please check out The Well-Told Tale. The biggest and best thing you could do right now for The Well-Told Tale is going over to iTunes and leaving a positive comment. So if you could do that, I would very much appreciate it. I want to say thank you very much to the chat. Fantastic questions today. Thank you so much for the super chats. Vanessa, a delight as always having you on. I will have you back on again within a couple of months, I'm sure, to be talking about Westworld in more detail as we go into Westworld season 3. But thank you so much. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. So thank you. Take care, everyone. I will see you same time next week. Next week, incidentally, I've got a Castles special, Westeros Castles special for you with a very special guest, just nerding out about the world of A Song of Ice and Fire and the castles within it. So if you like castles, I'll say the word castles again, castles next week. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again.